What if Jesus never intended for the entire world to receive the same teachings? What if behind the parables, behind the public sermons, behind the crowds gathered on hillsides, there existed a second body of teaching, one transmitted only in private, only to those who had been prepared, only to those who could be trusted with what the Gnostics called the living knowledge? The hidden teachings that have been preserved in fragments scattered across the sands of Nag Hammadi describe something most religious institutions have spent 2,000 years denying. That Jesus was not just a teacher of doctrines, he was a teacher of practices. Specific, precise, transmittable methods that, when applied, would dissolve the archon's grip on human consciousness and awaken what they called the divine spark within. These were not abstract spiritual concepts, they were techniques. 7 of them, according to the deeper readings of the Gnostic texts. 7 inner movements of awareness that Jesus reportedly transmitted only behind closed doors, only to those who had ears to hear, only to disciples who would not betray them by speaking too soon. Because the Gnostics understood something the institutional church would later bury: that the most powerful teachings cannot be broadcast. They have to be embodied, and until they are embodied, they have to be guarded with absolute silence. By the end of this video, you will know all 7 of these practices. Each one is simple in form, but radical in effect. Each one is something you can begin doing today, in the quiet of your own awareness, without anyone else knowing. Each one was designed by Jesus, according to the hidden tradition, to do exactly what the institutions feared most: to make you no longer dependent on any external authority for your connection to the source. The Archons cannot stop a soul that has learned these 7 practices. The demiurge cannot reach a consciousness that has remembered them. And no priest, no doctrine, no system of belief can position itself between you and what these practices reveal, because they reveal what was always already present. They simply remove the layers that have been hiding it. What you are about to receive is not theology. It is not philosophy. It is the inner science Jesus reportedly transmitted in secret to those who came to him, asking the only question that matters: how do I actually wake up? The answer, preserved in the buried Gospels, was never just a teaching. It was always 7 precise movements of awareness. And once you understand them, you will understand why they had to be hidden, and why the moment you begin practicing them, something in your reality begins to shift in ways the archonic system was never designed to handle. Before we explore the 7 practices themselves, you have to understand why they were systematically erased from the public teaching of Christianity. Because their disappearance was not accidental. It was strategic. And once you see why these practices were too dangerous to allow into mainstream religion, the practices themselves take on a different weight. The Gnostic texts are clear about how Jesus transmitted teaching. There were teachings for the multitudes, given in parables, in stories, in moral instruction that anyone could receive without preparation. And there were teachings reserved for what the Gospel of Thomas calls those who had become single ones. Disciples who had been prepared through silence, through self-observation, through the dissolving of certain identifications. Only these were given the practices. Only these were trusted with what the texts call the secret words. The Apocryphon of John describes the resurrected Christ appearing privately to John and transmitting teachings the institutional church would later refuse to canonize. The Gospel of Mary preserves what appears to be a private transmission to Mary Magdalene, who then attempted to share what she had received, only to be silenced by the male disciples who had not received the same teaching. Over and over in the buried texts we find this pattern. Jesus had a public teaching and a hidden teaching, and the hidden teaching contained the actual practices. Why was this dual structure necessary? The Gnostics gave a precise answer. The practices, if given to those unprepared, would not awaken them. They would be inverted. They would be turned into rituals, into doctrines, into things believed rather than things done. And once a practice becomes something you believe in, rather than something you embody, it has been neutralized. It can no longer dissolve identification, because it has become another identification. The institutional church understood this, perhaps more than they admitted. By burying the practices and preserving only the public teachings, they ensured that the inner science could never be transmitted at scale. What remained was theology, doctrine, sacrament. What was lost was the technology of awakening itself. There's also a deeper reason these practices were hidden. The Gnostics, drawing on traditions far older than Christianity, understood the principle that the silent vessel holds power. A seed buried in darkness grows roots. A seed exposed to light too soon dies. The Hermetic teachings preserved this knowledge as the law of mentalism, the recognition that all things begin in the mind and in spirit before they manifest in physical reality. To speak prematurely about an inner movement is to dissipate its power across the awareness of those who hear it. The Gnostic teachers warned that even sharing your practice with sympathetic listeners can drain its energy, because every word spoken about an inner work creates threads that bind your subtle development to the minds of others. This is why the ancient Egyptian initiates were sworn to secrecy, why the Sufis spoke of the secret within the secret, why the Tibetan masters reserved certain transmissions for direct teacher-student lineage. The practices Jesus reportedly gave were treated with the same protection, but there was an even more practical reason for the silence. The Archons, according to the Gnostic cosmology, feed on attention. They feed on emotional projection. They feed on the unconscious patterns of identification that human consciousness produces moment by moment. A practice that begins to break these patterns is in the archonic ecology, a direct threat. And the Archons respond, not always through external opposition, but through internal resistance, through doubt that arises just as the practice begins to work, through distraction that pulls attention away at the precise moment something is shifting, through the urge to talk about the practice, to seek validation, to make it visible to others, all of which dissipates its quiet power. By teaching the practices in secret and instructing students to keep them hidden, Jesus was protecting them from this exact mechanism. Silence was not virtue. It was tactical. The Archons cannot interfere with what they cannot see, and what is held in inner silence remains. For the archonic system, effectively invisible. This is why, when you receive the practices that follow, you must understand from the beginning that they are not concepts to share. They are not insights to post. They are not revelations to broadcast. They are inner movements to embody. And the embodiment requires the same protection the ancient mystery schools demanded. Practice them. Live them. Let them root in the silence of your own awareness. The world will see the change in you long before you ever need to speak about what produced it. And by then, the practices will have done their work and no archonic interference will be able to undo it. Practice 1. The inner witness, the first practice Jesus reportedly transmitted, is the most fundamental. It is the foundation upon which all others rest. The Gnostic texts describe it as the awakening of the inner witness, the recognition that there is something within you that observes thought without being thought, that perceives emotion without being emotion, that watches identification without being identified. This recognition, when stabilized, dissolves the entire foundation of the Archon's influence over consciousness. The practice is simple. Throughout your day, in any moment, pause and ask one question. Who is aware of this? When a thought is happening, who is aware of the thought? When an emotion is arising, who is aware of the emotion? When a reaction is forming, who is aware of the reaction? Do not try to answer the question intellectually. Simply notice that there is an awareness present that is observing what is happening. And that awareness is not the same as what it is observing. This is what Jesus meant in the Gospel of Thomas, when he said that whoever knows the all but fails to know himself lacks everything. The all is the contents of consciousness. Knowing yourself is recognizing the consciousness within which the all appears. The witness is not your thoughts. It is not your feelings. It is not your stories. It is the silent observer behind all of them, and the moment you begin to recognize it, you have started reclaiming the energy that was being lost to identification. When you observe a thought without identifying with it, the thought loses some of its grip. When you observe a fear without becoming the fear cannot fully consume you. The Gnostic teachers called this the inner sword. Not a weapon, but a clarity. A precise cut between the observer and the observed. And every time you make that cut, even briefly, the archonic system has less to feed on. Practice this dozens of times each day. In small moments. While walking. While breathing. While listening. The witness is always already present. You are simply learning to notice that you are it. Practice 2. The sacred silence. The second practice is the alchemy of silence. The Gnostic texts and the older mystery traditions agree on this principle with remarkable consistency. Inner work conducted in silence develops power. Inner work conducted in speech dissipates power. This is not superstition. It is a precise observation about how subtle energy behaves in human consciousness. The practice has 2 layers. The first is external silence. When something significant occurs in your inner life, a recognition, a breakthrough, an insight, a shift in awareness, do not speak of it. Do not announce it. Do not seek validation for it. Hold it, let it root. Let it deepen. The Gnostic teachers warned that the urge to share an inner experience is often the archonic system, attempting to neutralize it through dissipation. Every time you speak about a fragile inner development, you spread its energy across the awareness of those who hear you. What might have grown into something stable in silence becomes diluted in conversation. The second layer is internal silence. This is more subtle and more important. Most human consciousness is filled with constant inner narration. A continuous stream of commentary, evaluation, judgment, planning, reviewing. This inner noise functions, in the Gnostic understanding, as the same kind of dissipation. It scatters the subtle energy of the witness across an endless flow of thoughts about thoughts. The practice is to occasionally let the inner narration soften. Not by suppressing it, by allowing it to slow on its own when noticed. A few seconds of inner silence, repeated throughout the day, accumulates into something the archonic system cannot easily penetrate. The Gospel of Mary preserves the saying that matter gives birth to a passion that has no equal, a fever that arises when the soul forgets its origin. The fever is the inner noise. The forgetting is the constant identification with that noise. The remedy is not to wage war against thought. It is to occasionally rest in the silence that thought arises within. That silence is not absence. It is the medium of the witness. And the more often you return to it, the stronger your alignment with what the Gnostics called your true origin becomes. Practice 3. The threshold pause. The third practice operates in a window of time most people never notice exists. The window between stimulus and response. The window between something appearing in awareness and the automatic identification with it. The Gnostic teachers described this window as the threshold, and they taught that consciousness has a unique opportunity in this brief gap. The opportunity to choose something other than the conditioned reaction. When something happens, an external event, an internal thought, a sensation in the body, an emotional surge, there is a fraction of a second before the automatic identification completes. In that fraction, awareness is still pure. It has not yet been claimed by the pattern. The reaction has not yet locked in. This threshold exists in every moment of experience, but it goes almost entirely unnoticed because the identification happens so quickly that consciousness rarely registers the gap. The practice is to begin noticing the threshold, not to control what happens in it, but simply to recognize it is there. When you feel anger beginning to rise, notice the moment before it becomes your anger. When fear surfaces, notice the moment before it becomes your fear. When a desire activates, notice the moment before it becomes your desire. The noticing itself extends the threshold. It introduces a small space where awareness can rest before identification completes. The Gnostics taught that the archonic system depends entirely on the speed of identification. The faster a soul claims what arises as me, the more thoroughly the archonic patterns can install themselves as identity. Slowing down the threshold, even slightly, breaks the automatic mechanism. You begin to see that what appears in consciousness is not necessarily who you are. It is something arising that you have a choice about whether to inhabit or to simply observe. This choice is what the archonic system was designed to prevent you from ever discovering. The threshold pause is the practice of discovering it. In time, this practice becomes natural. You will notice the threshold without effort in the smallest moments. A flash of irritation will arise, and instead of becoming the irritation, you will see it as a movement passing through awareness. A wave of grief will surface, and instead of being consumed, you will witness it. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is presence so clear that nothing can completely capture you. And the energy that used to disappear into reactive identification begins to remain available to you, to be used for the deeper practices that follow. Practice 4. The Divine Spark Recall. Fourth practice is what the Gnostic texts most directly preserve as the heart of the teaching: the remembering of the divine spark. The Apocryphon of John describes how humanity was created with a fragment of the source itself, hidden within the layers of matter and conditioning, so that even the Archons could not destroy it. This fragment is your essential nature, what some traditions call the true self, what the Gnostics called the divine spark or the inner light. It cannot be created. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be taken from you. It can only be forgotten or remembered. The practice is the deliberate cultivation of remembrance, not as a mental concept, but as an experiential return. Find a quiet moment, anywhere, in any posture, with eyes open or closed, and let your attention settle. Do not try to achieve anything. Do not try to feel anything specific. Simply allow your awareness to rest in itself, beneath the layer of thoughts, beneath the layer of emotions, beneath the layer of the personality you have constructed. Something is present that has been present your entire life, and that something is what the Gnostics called your origin. You will not feel a dramatic flash. The divine spark is not theatrical. Its recognition is quiet, almost ordinary. It feels like coming home to something you never actually left. A sense of being, untouched by anything that has happened to you. A simple, unmoving presence that has always been the silent constant beneath every change in your life. Rest there. Do not try to hold it. Do not try to expand it. Simply notice it, and then continue your day. This practice, repeated, accomplishes something the archonic system cannot reverse. It reconnects your conscious awareness to your essential nature. The connection was never severed. It was only obscured by identification with everything else. And every time you return to the recognition, the obscuring layers thin a little more. Eventually, the divine spark is no longer something you remember occasionally. It becomes the ground from which your entire experience proceeds. This is what Jesus meant when he said in the Gospel of Thomas that the kingdom is spread across the earth, and men do not see it. The kingdom is the divine spark, present in every moment, awaiting only the recognition that has always been available. Practice 5. The pattern recognition. The fifth practice is the most diagnostic. It is the cultivation of the ability to see archonic patterns operating in your own consciousness in real time. The Gnostic text describes 7 primary patterns the Archons use to capture human awareness: darkness, desire, ignorance, the allure of death, the pull of the flesh, false wisdom, and wrathful pride. These are not personal flaws. They are systemic patterns built into the architecture of conditioned consciousness, and every human encounters all of them throughout life. The practice is to learn to recognize when one of these patterns is operating, not after it has captured you, but while it is in motion. This is more subtle than ordinary self-awareness because the patterns disguise themselves as you. Wrathful pride feels like righteous certainty about your position. False wisdom feels like spiritual superiority over those who do not yet understand what you understand. Desire feels like authentic motivation toward what you supposedly want. Each pattern presents itself not as a pattern, but as your own legitimate identity in that moment. To recognize the pattern, you have to develop a specific kind of attention. Not judgmental, not moralistic, diagnostic. When you feel certainty hardening, ask whether it is actual clarity or whether it is wrathful pride dressed as clarity. When you feel spiritual elevation, ask whether it is genuine recognition or whether it is false wisdom dressed as awakening. When you feel pulled towards something with intense longing, ask whether it is authentic alignment or whether it is desire pulling you into a loop. The patterns do not survive being seen as patterns. They survive only by being mistaken for self. The Gnostic teachers used a particular phrase for this practice. They called it inner clarity. Not the absence of these patterns, which is impossible while embodied, but the ability to see them when they arise without becoming them. A practitioner of inner clarity can experience the rise of pride without inhabiting it as identity, can feel the pull of desire without being captured by it, can encounter false wisdom in their own thinking and recognize it before it solidifies into conviction. This recognition is what dissolves the archonic grip, because the patterns require unconscious agreement to function. Conscious recognition severs the agreement. Begin practicing in small moments. When you feel a strong reaction forming, briefly investigate which of the 7 patterns might be active. Most situations involve more than one. Anger often combines wrathful pride with false wisdom. Lust often combines desire with the pull of the flesh. Despair often combines darkness with the allure of death. The point is not to catalog them mechanically. The point is to develop the diagnostic eye. And once that eye opens, you will find the patterns operating constantly, not as rare disturbances, but as the ordinary background of conditioned existence. Seeing them is what allows them to lose their power. Practice 6, the wordless prayer. 6th practice is what the hidden teachings describe as the most direct method of alignment with the source. It is prayer, but not as the institutional church taught it. Not petition, not asking, not speaking. The Gnostic teachers called it wordless prayer, and they taught that it was the only form of prayer that actually reached what it pointed toward. The practice begins with the recognition that all spoken prayer is, in some sense, addressed outward. It assumes a distance to be crossed. It assumes a recipient to be persuaded. It assumes a request to be made. The Gnostic understanding inverted this entirely. The source is not distant. The recipient is not external. The request reinforces the assumption of lack. Wordless prayer dissolves all of these. To practice it, settle into stillness. Allow the urge to speak to soften. Allow the reaching toward something distant to dissolve. And then simply rest as awareness without directing attention anywhere. Not toward an object, not toward an outcome, not toward an image of the divine. Just rest as the awareness that is already present. In that resting, something occurs that no spoken prayer can produce. Alignment, not alignment with something far away, but alignment with what you already are. The Gospel of Thomas preserves the saying that when you make the inner as the outer, when you make the two one, you will enter the kingdom. Wordless prayer is the practical application of this teaching. The inner and the outer are not separate. The seeker and the sought are not separate. The one who prays and the one prayed to are not separate. When this is recognized in stillness, even briefly, What the institutional church calls heaven is not something you reach. It is something you are. And every time you practice wordless prayer, this recognition deepens, until eventually the assumption of separation that all institutional prayer was built on becomes, for you, simply false. Not theologically refuted. Experientially dissolved. Practice 7. The living Gnosis, the seventh and final practice, is what gives all the others their meaning. It is what the Gnostic teachers called living Gnosis, the integration of the previous 6 practices into a continuous quality of awareness that no longer requires deliberate effort. This is not an additional practice in the same sense as the others. It is the fruit of the others, the natural state that emerges when the first 6 have been cultivated long enough to become second nature. Living Gnosis is not enlightenment in the dramatic sense. It is not a state of perpetual bliss or constant transcendence. It is something far more grounded. It is the capacity to remain awake throughout ordinary life, to witness without effort, to rest in inner silence even while engaging the world, to notice the threshold even in moments of intensity, to remember the divine spark even while fully present to whatever is happening, to recognize patterns without judgment, to pray wordlessly even in conversation. All of these become not separate practices but aspects of a single, continuous quality of attention. The practice, paradoxically, is to stop practicing. Or rather, to stop treating the practices as discrete activities you do at certain times. Living Gnosis is what happens when you allow the practices to dissolve into the ordinary texture of your awareness. You are no longer doing the witnessing. The witnessing is happening on its own. You are no longer choosing inner silence. Inner silence has become the medium within which all your other activities take place. You are no longer recalling the divine spark as a separate exercise. You are operating from it. This is what Jesus reportedly meant in the Gospel of Thomas, when he said that the kingdom is not coming in a way that can be observed, that it is already here, that men do not see it because they are not yet awake within it. Living Gnosis is the awakening within ordinary life, not above it, not beyond it, within it. The same body, the same circumstances, the same daily existence, but now witnessed from the source rather than from the conditioned identity that previously experienced it. And from this witnessing, life itself begins to operate differently. Not because external circumstances have changed, but because you are no longer producing the unconscious reactions that previously shaped your experience of them. The Gnostic teachers warned that this practice cannot be rushed. It emerges naturally when the previous 6 have done their work. To attempt to leap directly to living Gnosis without the foundation is to produce a counterfeit. A spiritual identity that believes itself to be awake while remaining captured by subtler patterns. Many who pursue awakening end up in this counterfeit state. They speak of being awake while still operating from unconscious identification. The 7 practices in their proper order prevent this distortion. The first 6 dissolve the layers that would otherwise contaminate the 7th. And the 7th, when it emerges, is not something achieved. It is something that has always been waiting beneath the layers and is now finally allowed to be visible. This is the deepest meaning of the secret transmission Jesus reportedly gave. Not that there was hidden information being passed to a few, but that there was a direct encounter with what every human being already is, beneath the conditioning, beneath the patterns, beneath the archonic captures. The 7 practices were the path, and living Gnosis was not a destination at the end of the path. It was the recognition that the one walking the path was always already what the path was leading toward. The Archons cannot interfere with this recognition once it has stabilized, because there is no longer anyone separate from the source for them to feed on. The soul that has reached living Gnosis is in the Gnostic understanding, no longer in the system. Still embodied, still walking the earth, but no longer captured. You have now received what the Gnostic tradition preserved as the 7 practices Jesus transmitted in secret. The inner witness, the sacred silence, the threshold pause, the divine spark recall, the pattern recognition, the wordless prayer, and the living gnosis that emerges from their integration. These are not concepts to remember. They are movements to embody. And the difference between knowing them and practicing them is the entire difference between reading about awakening and actually waking up. Begin where you are today, not all 7 at once. The Gnostic teachers were specific about this. Start with the first practice and let it become natural before adding the second. Start with the inner witness. For 1 week, in any moment you can remember to do so, simply notice that there is awareness present. Notice it without trying to change anything. Notice it dozens of times each day, in small moments. After a week, this noticing will begin happening on its own. Then add the second practice. Then the third. Build slowly. The practices reinforce each other when they are layered properly. They interfere with each other when they are forced to. Quickly. And remember the principle that protected these practices for 2,000 years. Silence. Do not announce that you are practicing. Do not seek validation for what you are doing. Do not even keep elaborate records, because the recording itself can become a form of dissipation. The practices are most powerful when they are entirely invisible. The Gnostic teachers insisted on this so consistently that it must be considered part of the practice itself. The world will notice the change in you long before you ever need to speak of what produced it. And by the time it might be appropriate to share, the practices will have rooted so deeply that no external interference will be able to disturb them. There's one final teaching the buried texts preserved, and it is the teaching that gives all 7 practices their ultimate meaning. The Gnostics taught that you are not learning these practices in order to become something you currently are not. You are learning them in order to recognize something you have always already been. The divine spark is not earned. The witness is not constructed. Living gnosis is not achieved through accumulation. All of it is what you are, beneath the layers that have obscured it. The practices are not building anything. They are removing the obstacles to what was always present. This is why the institutional church could not allow these practices to be transmitted at scale. Because a soul that practices them does not need the church, does not need the priest, does not need the doctrine, does not need the sacrament. The connection to the source is direct, immediate, and unbreakable. The 7 practices restore what every human being was born with and has merely forgotten. And once restored, no external system can claim authority over a consciousness that has remembered itself. The Archons will resist, not through dramatic interference, but through the subtler movements they have always used. Doubt that arises just as a practice begins to work. Distraction that pulls attention away in significant moments. The urge to share, to broadcast, to dissipate. Recognize these as the system protecting itself, not as legitimate signals from your own awareness. The practices, when held in silence, accumulate something the archonic system cannot easily counteract. A quiet, persistent return to what you actually are. And eventually, this return becomes more powerful than the patterns that have obscured it. Not through battle, through patient, daily, hidden remembrance. This is the secret Jesus reportedly transmitted only to those who had been prepared. Not a doctrine, not a belief, not a religion. 7 precise movements of awareness that, practiced in silence over time, undo every layer of archonic capture and reveal what was always present beneath them. You now have what was once given only to initiates in private rooms. What you do with it is, as it has always been, entirely between you and the source. The practices are simple. The work is daily. The transformation is real. And the silence that protects it is the same silence that has preserved this knowledge for 2,000 years. The path begins now. In the next moment of ordinary awareness, with nothing more dramatic than the quiet recognition that there is something within you that watches, and that something is what you have always been.